Hello, everyone. Welcome to Horse's Mouth Live. My name is Ellen Rogin, and I am so excited you're here. We have a great show for you, and as always, I bring you amazing guests that can give you fabulous information to help you grow in every area of your life, especially your business. And I'm really excited about our guest today and our topic. It's a brand new one for me. We have a return guest to Horse's Mouth. He was on our podcast a while back, Jay Coulter. And I'll give you his formal brief introduction in a minute, but I met Jay when I was selling my practice. And Jay and his colleague Vince Kane kind of shepherded me through the whole process. And what I think is really great about Jay is he has this ability to have systems and processes around what he does, and he does it with heart and amazing communication skills. So last time Jay was on the show, we talked about how to stay in touch with your clients through pinging them, and he has great process to do that. And when I invited him back on and asked Jay what he wanted to talk about, we're going to talk about OKRs, which I had no idea what they were before, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, or actually Jay will. But let me just tell you a little bit more about Jay's professional background. Jay Coulter is an investment strategist and a consultant to financial advisors and firms. He has his own podcast, the Resilient Advisor Podcast. I know he does live streams on LinkedIn all the time, and he's authored 2 books for financial advisors. The first one is The Resilient Advisor and also The Resilient Advisory Business. He's got all sorts of great credentials. He's a CFP, a CIAM designation. He's got his MBA from Emory. So Jay, welcome back to Horse's Mouth.
Ellen, thanks for having me back on. I got to tell you, I wish I could have you come do my intros for my podcast. That was very gracious of you. And I know we shared a podcast a couple of years ago. I've been guest on podcasts in the past. I've been doing live streaming, but I've always been the interviewer and in charge. And now I'm on the other side. So it's a little bit uncomfortable. So I'm glad my first time is doing this with you.
Yes, well, we're thrilled to have you here. So, when we were talking about the show and I asked you, what would you most like to share with our audience? You sent me this idea of OKRs, which is a way for financial advisors to leverage strategies that have been used in Silicon Valley for growth and leadership. And I'm thinking to myself, I have no idea what an OKR is. So let's start right there. What is an OKR?
Yeah. And this is one of my favorite topics outside of anything related to investments. So I appreciate you letting me come on and share this story. I've found it impactful in my personal life and in my business, and I've seen it have an impact on financial advisors. So I'm excited to share the process and the system. But I think, Alan, if we start with the story and the history of it, that could put some context on the power of OKRs. So I want to start with the story. In 1979, Andy Grove, then president of Intel, was sitting in his office. It's the late fall, and there was a real problem at Intel. Their dominant microprocessing chip that had driven all the growth of the company through the 1970s was under attack from Motorola. Motorola had launched a new chip that was faster and cheaper, the easiest way, of course, to take market share from any company, and their sales managers across the country were distraught. Intel was actually facing an existential crisis. So Andy Grove called a leadership meeting, and leveraging this OKR system that we're going to talk about today, was able to put together a plan that they executed over the next 6 months to ward off Motorola. And of course, we have 2020 hindsight now. We know Motorola won that war, but it's that system, the very system that he actually created in the late 60s, that he used to drive all the growth of Intel through the 1970s, that helped them stave off the Motorola threat. Now, there was a guy on his team named John Doerr, who's really the godfather of OKRs now throughout Silicon Valley, because once he left Intel, he joined Kleiner Perkins, which is a very well-known venture capital company in the Silicon Valley. And in the 1990s, he had a new client, a little company that was started in a garage when he made the investment, called Google. And he presented to the Google team how OKRs could help them manage their growth. To this day, Google still uses this OKR system we're going to talk about throughout the organization for both leadership and growth. But it didn't stop at Google. Today, companies such as LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and it's not just the social media companies because Microsoft and Cisco use the OKR system. And it's not just technology companies. We found use cases at BMW and Disney leveraging this OKR system we're going to talk about today. Now, it's not just limited to the business world either. When Bill and Melinda Gates started the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they hired a woman named Patty Stonesifer to take charge. And she had a very daunting task because the foundation was at one time a startup, and it was also the largest foundation in the world. Endowed with $20 billion, Ellen, every advisor listening knows they had to disperse $1 billion a year. Well, Patty also sat on the board at Twitter, and Twitter on their board meetings were talking about the power of these OKRs we're going to talk about. And she went and took it to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Bill Gates said that's what helped him make decisions about disbursements from the foundation. And if the fastest growing tech companies in the world and the largest foundation in the world aren't enough to pique your interest, Bono, the lead singer of the most popular group U2, uses OKRs in his philanthropy. In fact, he was merging two organizations about 10 years ago, and he brought John Doerr and his team in to talk about OKRs because it was floundering. And to this day, Bono credits OKRs for saving his nonprofit. So there's lots of use cases for it. I encourage anybody who wants to do a deeper dive on OKRs, buy John Doerr's book, Measure What Matters. But what I did, Ellen, after reading that book, I knew there were applications in our industry because of the incredible simplicity of OKRs. So I customized them for financial advisors.
And OKRs stands. I was thinking about this before the show, how our industry loves acronyms so much, right? There's,
Yep.
ETFs and FINRA and spiders and SIPC, and there's so many. So OKRs again stands for?
So simple acronym for objectives and key results, where objectives are your big grandiose ideas that really make you a little bit uncomfortable and make you stretch outside of your comfort zone. And key results are the time-specific numeric things that you're going to measure that you predetermine will help you achieve those objectives. This was born out of the old stodgy management by objectives from Peter Drucker, where you use those cold, soulless KPIs, key performance indicators, to drive it. And Andy Grove thought there would be a better way in the late 1960s. And that's why he created this as a way to be more aspirational and big picture thinking, as opposed to micromanaging and leading with more of a stick instead of a carrot.
Okay, so I'm really curious because, I'm hearing there was success in, first it was all these tech companies, and I'm thinking, well, what does that have to do with advisors? And then you brought in nonprofits. All the stories you gave were in areas with people with really big budgets and lots of team and staff, where some of our advisors have larger offices, but many don't, or they're a sole practitioner, or they have a few team people. So how should advisors look at this idea of looking at objectives and key results?
Yeah, so let me answer that question with another story. So this is the exact story that John Doerr told the Google team when he first made an investment in the firm and was encouraging them to use this OKR framework to drive their business growth. This is a story of a fictional professional football team. And so inside that organization, the owner hires a general manager. And that general manager has one objective, which is to make money for the owner. Again, I'm trying to keep this in simple terms so you can see how this can water flow through an organization or be used inside of a small advisory team. So if the general manager's objective is to make money for the owner, two simple key results to measure that could be, number one, win the Super Bowl. Number two, have 90% capacity in the stadium for home games. With that information, the folks that report to the general manager are able to build their own OKRs that tie in from an organizational level. Again, keeping with the same simple analogy that we're using, on the offensive side, to win the game, the head coach might say, all right, my objective is to win the Super Bowl, and I'm going to be able to do that if my offense generates 400 yards of offense on average per game, and the defense is in the top 5. So then the folks underneath the head coach, Ellen, he can go to the offensive coordinator and say, we need 400 yards of offense. That becomes the objective for the offensive coordinator, then builds the key results. Going back up to the top of the organization, remember the general manager didn't just want to win the Super Bowl, he needed to make money for the owner. And that gets down to the marketing side of that tree as well. So the CMO of the organization would have an objective of having the stadium at 90% capacity. So she could task her team with the key results of running 20 promotions in the local market and having their star on 10 media appearances. Whatever she knows historically will help drive 90% capacity. What that does is it provides clarity throughout the whole organization. And to use a simple term, it gets everybody rowing in the same direction. And it was that example when I read it in the book where I thought financial advisors, whether they're just a handful or a larger firm, could leverage this framework to create clarity in their organization that I find most of them lack to make sure everybody's rowing in that same direction.
So, Jay, can you now bring an example down or explain how an advisor or an advisory firm might be able to use these tools to help them grow, to grow their business, and as a leader might help the person who's heading the firm, the founder, the CEO, run that firm more effectively?
Absolutely. So here's the example that I like to give because it's really more indicative of most advisors out there. You're running a small practice inside of a wirehouse, or you have a small firm where there's an advisor, maybe a marketing person, and a CSA. So the example I give is by design because I don't want any advisor to ever have this be their OKR. And I like to be Socratic with this so people think through their own ideas because these are designed to be customizable and very specific to how you work. So say you're an advisor and your target market is dentists, 401k plans in the state of Georgia. Very defined niche, which Ellen, as you know, is important to have to grow your business. So that advisor might create an objective of become the dominant 401k leader in the state of Georgia for 401k plans, right, in the dental community. It's a big objective. I mean, that's a massive objective, right? So we need to figure out how we're going to measure that. And keep in mind, your objective can stay the same quarter over quarter, but what changes are the key results. So she might say, you know what, to do that, I need to onboard 3 new 401k plans every quarter, and I need to add 10 401k prospects to my pipeline. If I do that over my goal of, say, a year or two, I could become the dominant 401k provider to dentists in the state of Georgia. With that, her CSA could say, all right, my objective is the same as my advisor. We want to become the dominant 401k provider to dentists in the state of Georgia. We don't want these plans to leave. So my key results could be something like 90% client satisfaction scores on surveys to our 401k clients and 24-hour response time to any participant that calls in. Keeps them on the exact same page. On the other side, the marketing person knows that the advisor needs to close 3 pieces of business in the quarter. Ellen, we know how hard that is, as well as add 10 to the pipeline. So that person's key results could be directly related, numeric and time bound to helping the advisor accomplish those. And here's where that helps. And I think every advisor can relate. You come into the office and you think, what in the world has my staff been doing? Are they really helping me accomplish what I need to accomplish? And you should also know this, advisors, your staff comes in some days and they say, what in the world am I doing? What in the world is my advisor doing? I'm just punching a time clock here. Folks that use OKRs don't have that problem.
So how do you, let's say you have your objectives. So let's say you're clear enough in your example that you want to be the dominant player in 401ks for dentists in the state of Georgia. How do you start to assess what are the key results? What if you just don't know? Is it a trial and error thing? Is because sometimes we wouldn't always know what are those steps to get us to that clear objective.
That's right. It is definitely a trial and error. It takes a while. In fact, the more research I did on OKRs outside of just the book written by John Doerr, but other thought leaders in the space, it can take some of these, 1,000-person tech companies a whole year to get on board with it. There is an RIA firm in the Southeast that recently adopted OKRs, and they said it took them about 2 or 3 quarters They hired a professional consultant to come in and help them. And when I speak to their advisors, they're on board because they learn through trial and error of the process. I know personally, larger organizations that I've worked with helping implement OKRs, it is definitely a multi-quarter approach. And where I found we get the best results is if we start with the leadership team and they adopt OKRs and they see the power of how they align incentives. And then you start bringing in other divisions and other folks.
How do you have the discussion of what the objective should be? And I'm assuming sometimes someone could be shooting for a target and realize that was not the real target that they were meant to shoot for. They changed their mind. Like, how does that
Yeah.
process work on the objective side of things?
Yeah, so this is definitely more art than science, but let me give you an example. So I have a client who had a goal of, and this was let's call it a $150 million RIA, and they wanted to onboard about $10 million a quarter. Listeners know how difficult that can be. But he created the objective of $10 million a quarter. And gosh, the first quarter he did it, he only had six. And then the second quarter, he only had eight. And he was questioning whether he should continue down that path. But it was that large objective, that large goal that helped drive the results. Because if you, what's the old saying? You shoot for the moon and land among the stars, you're still in a pretty good place. It's that big picture thinking that where OKRs have really been able to help companies grow. If you read John Doerr's book, he talks about Google specifically, where both YouTube and Google Chrome were driven by outrageous, audacious objectives that everybody in the company saw and thought could not be hit. But that is what drove the motivation to make it happen.
And do you find that the objective needs to be something that is financial like that? Or is there an impact objective that could happen? Because I'm thinking about a couple different things. One, I'm thinking when I first started in my advisory practice, it wasn't a big goal like that, but I thought I wanted to work with people in creative arts like graphic designers and photographers. And I thought, wouldn't that be cool because they're so interesting? And then once I got into it, I realized they don't have any money. And maybe it's interesting, but they weren't good prospects for an advisory firm. So that objective would have changed for me. And another thing that I found over time is that when I just had purely financial objectives, like raise X amount of net new assets or something like that, for me personally, it wasn't that motivating when I didn't add in another component there. I get that it's super measurable. So, what other things would get factored in here so that you're really driven behind that and your team gets inspired by it? And then also that you have some flexibility to make sure that you're shooting for the right objective.
Yeah, and all very fair questions that generally come up as an advisor or organization are considering if OKRs are something they should try. And so I think I could best answer by a couple of examples. So I was working with an advisor that fell in love with OKRs after reading John Doerr's book. And so he called me and he said, Jay, let's figure out a way to build OKRs. And he had an employee who was in more of an administrative role, but had marketing aspirations, who went through the OKR exercise. And Ellen, you might relate to this based upon your first niche attempt. She was in the theater community in a major city here in the country, and she decided that her target was going to be people who work in theater. I knew she was not going to have a good experience with that because they don't have any money. It's not really a good market to go after, but she was so passionate about attacking that market and the objective that came along with it. But through trial and error, figured out that would not necessarily be a good approach. Another firm that we've gone through this exercise with that have adopted OKRs are very passionate about biblically responsible investing, and that flows throughout the culture of their organization. So they have language around that written into their OKR that everybody is supportive and behind. Another advisor that I've worked with that adopted OKRs is very passionate about socially conscious investing, and that permeates through his OKR structure. So it depends on the advisor. And I don't want to take us off on too much of a tangent, but what I have learned, if you're familiar with the Kolbe A assessment, you could do this with DISC as well. If you figure out the personality type on DISC or the modus operandi on Kolbe, you can actually figure out who's going to want hard numbers and goals to go after, and who's going to want something that has more of a creative, aspirational theme to their OKRs.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I like the structure around it because it's easy to just be in the business of doing business and not always doing those activities or tasks that are going to get you to where you want to go, whatever that objective is. Um, so I'm sensing a lot of great benefits for this, but what do you think are your what you call your big four reasons for implementing OKRs?
Yeah. So the real there's lots of benefits to OKRs. If you adopt them, you're going to find some things that really stand out. Number one, if your organization buys in, it really drives focus and commitment. I'll give you an example with myself. So I tend to get pulled and let myself get pulled, quite frankly, in multiple directions with different projects. And that's the nature of consulting. Now I know if somebody reaches out with a potential collaboration idea, if it's not on my OKRs for the quarter, I now have permission to say, no, that's not going to work this quarter. Let's talk at the end. Taking that to the financial advisor, especially if you're on the staff of an advisor that's all over the place, if they come to you with a project in the middle of a quarter, you can ask them, is this a priority over our OKRs? And what I have found is that actually helps both the support staff and the advisor stay on target, which really leads to the second point, which is team alignment. The example earlier of the advisor coming into the office and not knowing what the support team is doing, or the support team coming in and feeling like they don't have any guidance or leadership, that is completely eliminated. The third benefit is the ability to then track for accountability with transparency. Now, this sometimes is where OKR adoption runs into some friction. Somebody who's been mailing it in, not carrying their weight, pulling the wool over the rest of the team's eyes. This, you realize very quickly when you see what OKRs are, that you're going to get exposed, and that can create some problems in the organization, but also, flush out some of the potential problems that you needed to get rid of anyway. And then the last one is it enables and empowers you to stretch for really, really big goals. The advisor I mentioned earlier who hasn't hit that $10 million a quarter yet, like, he's okay with it. Hitting sixes and hitting eights, you're going to grow your advisory practice really, really fast. In fact, you will learn if you choose to study OKRs. The goal at Google is to never hit your objective and key results, but to accomplish about 70% of them. And they consider that you're sandbagging if you're hitting it every time. That's not what they're looking for. They want you to aim big and miss, as opposed to aim small and hit. And then what I've
Yeah, the
heard from senior leadership, the number one thing they get from it is it enables them to move from opinions to actual data. It's no longer is so-and-so accomplishing what we want them to do. It's something that are pulling up on a sheet of paper.
Are you finding advisors are using this in their performance reviews with their team?
All right. So most proponents of OKRs will tell you specifically don't use this for performance because it makes folks sandbag those key results like we were just talking about. But it's only natural, especially if you don't already have performance systems in place. If you choose to start doing some of your own research on OKRs, and there are a lot of rabbit holes you can go down on this, there's lots of software out there that can help you micromanage employees using OKRs. And I think I've tested most of them. They're overbearing, and I have found them to be a lot for financial advisors and have yet to find one that works well for financial advisors. And if you think about the way they do it at Google, which is probably the most successful organization to leverage OKRs, they do it in a Word or a Sheets document on their shared server. It's nothing fancy. It is something that is clear, it's done quarterly, and then that's what they use to manage their OKR process. For listeners here, I give away all my resources around OKRs. So if you go to jcoulter.com/leadership, you can download my ebook on it, which simplifies it for financial advisors, a PDF of a framework that you could use to build your own, an Excel file that you can use to build your own, as well as a Google Sheets that you can copy that will include a nice tracking system for you in there and a way to go and start building out your own OKRs right now.
That's so generous of you, Jay. And I would also add, when I went to that page, there's a really great video of you explaining how this process works. And I think it would be a good refresher for people here, a way for them to share it with their team. And I was also thinking, like, how cool is it that you put that up there? It also may inspire advisors to, when they have something they want to share with their clients that they could do some type of similar video. And if I remember correctly, it was your voice over slides, which normally we like to see people, but it was so clear and I would imagine less stress for some advisors than being on camera trying to explain a concept. Is that how you
That's right.
found it to be?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I have learned that our attention spans are shrinking, and advisors' attention spans are shrinking even more through no fault of their own. Folks like you and I, Ellen, produce a lot of content and we put it out there. They can watch an interview like this and say, "Wow, OKRs sound great." And then the phone rings, they're stuck on Twitter, client comes by the office and then they forget about it. And having those quick refreshers really help the value of the content that you're producing get adopted a lot easier. That's why I like the videos. Are you doing a lot of video work now?
Yeah, more and more. And yeah, well, everyone's doing more videos now, whether they're live. This live stream with Horse's Mouth is new. For many, many years, we had our podcast, and it's been about a month and a half when we started live streaming, which I'm so appreciating getting to see my guests. And I find the conversation is really interesting. So, yes. And you inspired me that there may be ways I can explain some of my thought leadership similarly to is what you've done on my page. So thank you for that, Jay.
Of course. Hey, I just steal from everybody else. We all borrow from each other.
Yeah, well, um, great. So just one more time, it's jcoulter.com/leadership. Is that where we
Leadership,
want
that's
them to
correct.
go? Yes. Great. So you guys all, anyone listening to this, please go there. And if you're listening and not watching the video where you can't see it coming up, the URL, it's jcoulter.com, Jay, jcoulter.com/leadership. Jay has always been so generous with his information. So go ahead and get that. And check out his books. Jay's really great. I know he does fabulous work in working with advisors. And I'm assuming if they go there, they can contact you as well, Jay. Is that right?
That's right.
Great. Good. And so thank you to you all who are watching us live, watching the recording, maybe listening to the podcast. We're always thrilled to have you here on Horse's Mouth Live. Again, my name is Ellen Rogin. You can find out more about me at my website, which is ellenrogin.com. And if you go to ellenrogin.com/horse's mouth, there's a special report there. There's some additional resources I've been adding over time that will help you grow your business. There's some new mindfulness resources that we've put up there. And just wanted to thank you for being here with us. And hopefully you will subscribe on iTunes and follow us when we do live presentations. The goal is to do these pretty much every Tuesday at 2:00 Eastern Standard Time. So we're thrilled to have you here. And again, thank you, Jay, for being here. Always so grateful
Thanks
to
for
have
having
our
me.
connection. And for all of you listening, remember the question to ponder today is how big of a positive impact are you willing to make? And I'll add for today's show, how big of a OKR are you willing to commit to? And remember, be great and create